Going through the All-22 film of the Bears' loss to the Miami Dolphins gives us some answers on how Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were able to find so much space against this Bears defense, why Justin Fields had so much success rushing the ball, while David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert didn't, and some other cool tidbits about some plays that almost happened that the Bears could be setting up for future games.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today and hopefully every single day. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for Locked On Bears listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. On the show today, we review the Bears All-22 film. We go through what we learned from watching that tape to get a better sense of, okay, what went wrong for this Bears defense? How were the Miami Dolphins able to move the ball so effectively through the air, in particular with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle? We'll look at the Bears' running game and how Justin Fields had a record-setting day, and yet in front of the same offensive line, David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert kind of struggled to get things going there. We'll look at what the Bears were doing offensively and some of what the Dolphins were doing defensively to have that dynamic. And we'll wrap up with some other interesting things that we're able to pull from the All-22 that you'd miss on the broadcast. A couple of plays that were set up that didn't quite come together the way the Bears were hoping they would, but it worked. And it was right there, and you'd think they come back to it in another game and maybe execution goes a little bit better. They could have a few tricks up their sleeve in particular. But I want to start with this Dolphins offense, largely moving the ball at will in the first half and certainly slowed down a little bit in the second half. And we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's podcast, recap of the game after the first watch, but now having been able to go through the All-22 film, a couple of things stood out to me. One in particular, the Dolphins came back to this same passing concept 3 or 4 times, and it worked every single time. They would do it on different sides of the formation and with slightly different players in it, but in terms of like the route concepts, it was fairly similar, where they would have 3 wide receivers to the same side of the field, typically in a fairly tight split. Not always a super tight bunch, but usually not a ton of distance in between them. They're not spreading all the way out, out by the numbers or anything like that, but it'd be, 3 receivers all to that same side. And usually your innermost receiver, the closest towards the center in the ball, was Tyreek Hill, and he would be running a wheel route. So he would sort of go underneath the 2 receivers outside of him towards the sideline and then up downfield at the end of that. And then one of the inside receivers would run some sort of like curl or spot route where, they'd head towards the middle of the field and kind of turn and occupy space there. And then the other receiver would go some kind of like deeper crossing route, a post or maybe a bent vertical or more of a true, dragger or intermediate crossing route over the middle of the field. And what stood out to me is every time you saw them run that concept, it seems like they were hitting it on a different route each time. It was like, sometimes the Bears had the wheel route perfectly covered. Jalen Johnson or whoever's on the outside stayed over top of a hill really well and didn't bite when he went to the flat early on the route. But then the receiver breaking over the middle of the field gets behind the linebacker who gets sucked in by the curl route there and gives up way too much yards. It's 17 yards to Jalen Waddle over the middle of the field. That's a big first down and a big completion. Then the next time they run it, somebody follows Waddle over the middle of the field and somebody follows Hill up the sideline, but the curl is wide open and they get, the 10 yards they needed on 3rd and 6. And it's like, well, yeah, I guess, they took away the bigger play options on that one, but still gave up the first down type of situation. But, like the Bears never had an answer for all of them, because then there was another one where I think it was Jalen Johnson was in man coverage on Tyreek Hill and tried to run underneath the routes and kind of got a natural pick route, rub route situation, and Hill ran and hit the wheel route up the sideline for a pretty big gain as well. So it's just like, man, they kept coming back to the concept, and it seemed like no matter what coverage the Bears were in, one of those three options on that route was open. And it really, I think, is good credit to Mike McDaniel, the Dolphins head coach and offensive play caller there, who really does a good job of scheming these guys open and getting things that Tua can then read and throw in rhythm. Because some of this was just Tua making really good throws, really on-time, accurate decisions in windows that, weren't always super, super wide open. There were a lot of times he was trying to get it over the top of Bears linebackers, and he's slitting in there where it's 6 inches, maybe more than 6, a foot or two just outside of the reach of the underneath linebacker who's coming across for it. And I couldn't help but feel like on a few of those plays, if that's Roquan Smith in that spot in coverage and not Joe Thomas, I just wonder if maybe, not that Roquan Smith picks it off every single time, but maybe he gets a fingertip on it, or maybe his instinctual response to the throw is a half second quicker that maybe keeps Tua from pulling the trigger in the first place altogether, because Tua doesn't really tend to put the ball in harm's way all that much. So it's not that Roquan would have had a bunch of interceptions in this game, but I do think you missed him a little bit in coverage on the back end. It was also nice to confirm some of what we had seen in the live broadcast of how the pressure really disrupted Tua when the Bears did get pressure on him. That it seemed like when they could get him off rhythm and get him off his spot, their passing game fell apart. And the PFF pressure numbers afterwards really backed that up. Tua under pressure, 3 of 8 for 17 yards. It's 2.1 yards per attempt on those throws. The problem was there were only 8 of those plays where Tua was under pressure. Out of his 31 total dropbacks, about 25%, almost just a little over a quarter of his throws. And you'd like to get him under pressure and disrupted a little bit more, because of course on his clean passes he was 18 of 22 for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns, and was otherwise particularly stellar. So getting him disrupted works. Just easier said than done when you have a Bears pass rush that's lacking a Robert Quinn nowadays, and lacking an overall dominant pass rushing force up in that interior. Bears, on the other side, did a pretty good job of keeping Justin Fields clean in the pocket. I don't think it was quite as low as what Tua Tagovailoa's pressure rate was, but it's actually a little bit closer than I thought when I pulled up the numbers here real briefly. But we'll get into some of the things the Bears did well offensively and why there was this discrepancy in the running game where Fields was incredible and the run plays were opening up for him, but not as much for the 2-star running backs that we thought were really the strength of this Bears offense. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of the Locked On Bears podcast and this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. BetterHelp is here to help get your mental health on track, because everyone deserves to feel their best, and BetterHelp makes it easier to get started, because they're the world's largest online therapy service. They've matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. And that's so key. It makes it so much easier. You don't have to you don't have to drive and add a commute to it. It's so much easier to schedule. You can do it at home. You can do it oftentimes at a very convenient time in your schedule. I do online therapy every single week, and it's a really important part of maintaining my mental health. Like we keep saying, it's not about being in crisis. It's not about, just looking for self-help, but it's about really taking care of your mind the same way you try and take care of your body. So if you're ever feeling stuck, get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. We saw how effective it was whenever Justin Fields would run the ball against the Miami Dolphins, whether it was on a passing play that he scrambled himself or on, those new designed runs that have been such a big part of the Bears offense, where it's just Fields is the runner and there's no handoff, there's no nothing. It's just him carrying the ball. And when he rushes for 178 yards and the team rushes for over 200 again, it certainly goes down as not a good run defense performance from the Miami Dolphins. But you also look at the box score and you see David Montgomery averaged 2.6 yards per carry, just had 36 yards on 14 attempts. And Khalil Herbert wasn't much better, 3.3 yards per carry, 23 yards on 7 attempts. Neither one had a run longer than 8 yards. And again, it was not like the Bears offense could not run the ball. It was still a very effective part of their offense. But I was really curious to get into the all-22 here and try and understand that discrepancy a little bit more. And a couple of themes came out for me in that. One, a lot of Justin Fields rushing did come on passing plays or read option plays where, it's not like the blocking is drawn up for him. He's often running away from the blocking and just using his speed to outrun the players on the Miami Dolphins defense. And of course, make guys miss in open space because he's electric. He's phenomenal. It's so much fun to watch Justin Fields not only throw the ball, but also as a runner. I think PFF had him with 8 missed tackles on 7 rushing attempts, literally averaging more than 1 missed tackle every time he carried the ball. And I'm sure, 3 or 4 or 5 of them came on the 61-yard touchdown run, but still, it was really, really impressive. But even within that, I think only 4 of them were designed quarterback runs. And I think he had, quite a few scrambles then built into that made it, that inflated, that created some of that differentiation of like, it wasn't always run blocking put into effect there. And I think schematically, what stood out to me was that the Dolphins in their front, particularly their defensive linemen in their 3-4 scheme, they were really loading them up in like a tight bear front with some really big bodies that they have on that defensive line as well. But essentially you had the nose tackle head up over the center, basically, one-on-one. I think Raekwon Davis is their nose tackle. And worth noting, he's 335 pounds. You can see he is a big boy. And their other defensive tackle, Christian Wilkins is 310 pounds. And they rotate John Jenkins, the former Bear, in there, and Emmanuel Ogbah's, up over 275, 280. So there's some real strength and movement ability up there. But in their tight front, it's the nose tackle right over the center. And then their 2, defensive ends on the 3-4 interior were lined up as like 3 technique defensive tackles, or sometimes 4-eye. It's very similar, but like to oversimplify it, essentially between the guard and the tackle. So they're inside of the tackles. And so they've got those interior gaps like really tightly lined up. There's not, that extra space when you think of like a 3 technique to one side and a 1 technique where you have a clear like space between 2 linemen where you can create a little bit of a natural opening based on the defensive lineman's alignment. This was much, much tighter front with big, big, heavy players on that interior, which made it difficult for the Bears to really get much movement on the interior of the line of scrimmage. Like the Bears were not moving these guys down the field very far. They weren't getting off the double teams, and they weren't getting a lot of a push up front. And you combine that with the choice in rushing play calling by Luke Getsy. And by all means, Luke Getsy has done a phenomenal job with this Bears offense, and they've been scoring 30-plus points a game here. So, like, this is not a complaint of like, oh, Getsy's doing a bad job, but I just scratch my head a little bit as I try and find the difference here. That over and over again, between the carries with Herbert and Montgomery, they were almost always inside running plays. Mostly inside zone, where your aiming point is to one side of the center. Usually it's the A gap on either left or the right side, and then you cut back based on that. And that was where the strength of this Dolphins run defense was for the entire game. And the Bears just could not get that movement up front. And I was surprised they almost never went to the stretch zone runs that get Herbert and Montgomery going more horizontal and get your offensive linemen using that speed, right? That was what Ryan Poles made the emphasis this season, right? Was want these guys to be lighter and more athletic so we can get them moving. And going against 300-pound plus defensive linemen across from them, they're not going to be as good at moving laterally. They want to be in a stationary place. They want you to run downhill at them because they're bigger and stronger than the Bears offensive line. And that's what the Bears kept running their running backs right into. Whereas when Justin Fields was doing the design quarterback runs, it's quarterback sweep left, pin and pull left, power right. Like it was always getting Fields to the outside. A lot of lateral movement on those quarterback design runs. And that's also why it worked so well. They blocked those runs better because it was a better matchup for the offensive lineman. I don't know why with Montgomery and Herbert, they kept trying these interior runs over and over again. It wasn't exclusively only interior runs, but it was mostly interior runs. And I just kind of kept scratching my head as to why they weren't trying to stretch that out a little bit more with those guys and run away from where the Dolphins' interior offensive line proved to be a little bit too stout for this Bears offensive line. The other thing I wanted to mention about the Bears running backs too, before I forget, not only were they not getting much in the running game, but they weren't doing a lot in the passing game, and that's because they were being used a lot in pass protection. Like that was clearly something the Bears wanted to build in to this game. Of David Montgomery stayed in. I think it was a season high number of pass blocking snaps he had. Khalil Herbert, I think, tied a season high. Kari Blasingame was in for a lot of those, and even Cole Kmet was up near season high in terms of numbers of snaps where it's a passing play, but they're just staying in the block and not out running routes. And I think it helped keep good protection for Justin Fields. And I also think it's probably matchup based in this game. They knew they were going to get a lot of man coverage from the Dolphins. And so, your receivers are going to have more of those one-on-one situations, and maybe you trust them a little bit more to win more of those one-on-ones when you have Chase Claypool added to the mix and Mooney out there, and that, you kind of know a little more what you're getting from a coverage standpoint. So you don't need as much from the running backs and tight ends to be those sort of safety valve check down options, because, the guys that would be covering them in man coverage end up not having a real responsibility on the play, and you sort of take them out of the mix a little bit more as well. So all in all, I think it kind of gave us a few more answers about what was going on in the running game. And I should also mention too, they used a QB spy on Justin Fields a number of times, and he just outran the quarterback spy like over and over again. He'd make him miss the tackle, or he'd just run faster than him. It was funny to watch. The Dolphins were really trying to stop him from rushing the ball, and they just couldn't. I mean, it was a big emphasis for them. Like they'd have on the read option, they'd be standing there waiting for Justin Fields, trying to force Justin Fields to hand off the read option, and he'd keep it and just outrun the unblocked defender. It's so much fun to watch, especially on the All-22 film, when you see it from behind and you can see the whole sort of the play in front of Fields develop. It was a lot of fun, and I love watching what he's been able to do as the runner, even though the backs couldn't quite get as much going in this game. It looked like the Bears were ready to crack open a few other plays in this one that didn't quite come together, but conceptually worked. They just didn't, the timing didn't quite work out, but the receivers were open. There were plays there. I want to get into some of the other tidbits from a few plays and some other notes from this game, from this Bears All-22 film, more so on the passing side than the rushing side, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. It's the better way to do daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks puts you in complete control. You're not competing against other players. You're whether you win or lose isn't dependent on what's in that other person's lineup. You pick the lineup, and then you're in complete control as to whether you win or lose. Because with PrizePicks, you pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry, not just for Bears performances, but across all professional sports, college sports, and so much more. If it's a sport, they pretty much have it at PrizePicks. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 when you enter in our promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. You get it? Just don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for that instant deposit match up to $100. A few plays in particular stood out as like almost there and could have been something fun or cool or explosive for this Bears offense. It didn't quite come together, but you could see it building up, and it just, the timing and something would disrupt it here, or something wouldn't quite be there, and they weren't quite there, but you wonder if they keep working at it, they bring it out in a future game, we might see something come out. In particular, there was one that Justin Fields was asked about after the game, and I went back and watched it. I don't remember what quarter it was in, but they ran a handoff to Darnell Mooney. He started on the left side of the formation, came in, it was like an end around essentially, where Justin Fields hands it off to him, and Mooney ran to the right side of the field and, ends up rushing for, I don't remember, it was 3 or 5 yards. Unspectacular end around play. Wasn't blown up for loss, but wasn't a big breakaway type run. It was right around the edge of the red zone, maybe the 30 or the 25-ish yard line. Somewhere inside of the 40, but not any closer than the 20, in that 20 to 40 yard line range. And, whatever, 4-yard end around run. The Bears had run a couple of jet sweeps earlier in the game, just getting the wide receiver in the running game involved. Sure. But when you look a little bit closer, Justin Fields hands the ball off to Mooney and then turns and runs upfield and turns back and is looking for Darnell Mooney to throw the ball back to him 10 or 15 yards downfield across the field. And there is not a defender within 25 yards of Justin Fields. He is all alone with green grass, and that is a touchdown. If Darnell Mooney has time to load up and throw and can give him any sort of accurate, catchable ball in any way, shape, or form. Does not need to be in stride, does not need to be perfect. It would have been like when Justin Fields had that scramble drill play to Dante Pettis in the first game of the season against the San Francisco 49ers. Remember where Pettis is standing there wide open and Fields just like chucks it like straight up in the air and Pettis just catches it like a punt and runs for a touchdown. Like that's how wide open Justin Fields was on the play. Now, Darnell Mooney doesn't throw the ball because on the end around, there was immediately defenders in his face, and he didn't want to stop and try and throw and fumble or throw an interception. He just took it as a running play and basically had the option to do so. But Fields conceded. He said after the game, like, he was supposed to throw that to me and just didn't have the time to do so, but I wanted the ball there. And sure, that would have been really fun to see. So watch for that, some sort of trick play to throw back to Justin Fields at some point in a game this season, because they tried it in the game. I'm sure they've practiced it a bunch, and no one is staying with Justin Fields after he hands off that ball. And I think Luke Getsy's got that creativity there. They want to pull it out at some point, and we'll see if they're able to really connect on that. The other thing that stood out to me was there was at least one play, I think there were a couple, where Chase Claypool was open and was not targeted on those plays. And it wasn't because Fields didn't see him or whatever, but some of it's plays where Claypool is the single receiver on one side of the field. There's three receivers on the right side of the field. So Fields, of course, snaps and looks towards the three receiver side because there's three receivers over there. You're not just going to snap and only look at Chase Claypool, and if he's covered, then you're screwed, right? I mean, the play was designed to go to the three receiver side, but Claypool runs a vertical against press man and just smokes the cornerback and has a good step on him as he's working vertically downfield. And so design-wise, it was maybe never going to go to Claypool, or very unlikely to go to Claypool on that play, but he's getting open, right? He can win press man-to-man coverage, beat him vertically down the side of the field. And, we saw Fields take, two shots to Claypool. One was the pass interference that wasn't called, and the other one was another, jump ball type on the other sideline. Like, this is going to be a part of this Bears offense. And just because it didn't connect for a big, deep shot just yet, it's coming. And especially for that to already be showing up in Claypool's first game, 5 days after they traded for him, 6 days? I don't remember the exact calendar math there. Like, it was very limited in what they asked Claypool to do overall, but there was already, those sort of moments and opportunities there for things to be particularly good, especially as, there's this clear void. Not only do we know that the wide receiver talent was not great, but like in terms of how the Bears are operating the receiver room right now, Velus Jones was a healthy scratch. Didn't play, not injured, just didn't play. Bears didn't have a spot for him among the, the 50 or 45. I don't remember how many inactives they usually have. 46. I don't remember what the game day roster is. 47, 48, around there. Velus Jones not good enough to be one of those 46 or 7. I can never remember the exact number. Matt Eberflus said after the game it was about special teams that they need those backup spots for guys like Elijah Hicks, AJ Klein, Trevin Wesco, the people who are going to be four-phase special teams guys. And if Pettis is your punt returner and Herbert and Ebner are your kickoff return guys, then there's not really a spot for Velus Jones. And it's very concerning that your third-round pick isn't good enough to, take snaps away from Equanimeous St. Brown and Dante Pettis. Like, we're 9 games into Velus Jones' career at this point. Very early in terms of, like, the big picture, but you're willing to give a rookie a few games to get up to speed here. But 9 games is like, okay, why doesn't he get it yet? Like, why? Something is not going right for Velus Jones at this point, and it's a very real concern. It's not, he's a bust and he'll never be any good, but this is taking longer than it should, and this is slow, and that's an early red flag in his career, but it is not a final determinant in what his career will be. But then you have you also have Equanimeous St. Brown out there who drops a 4th and 10 play that Fields puts in his hands past the sticks to keep that final drive alive, and he leaves his feet for no reason. Like, it's just like weird technique stuff that, like, why are you as a 6-year receiver, or whatever it's been, 4, 5, 6-year wide receiver who's been in this offense for his whole career, it's not a jump ball. Why are you coming off your feet and then, of course, dropping the pass as well? And there was that play in the 3rd or 4th quarter where Fields was under pressure and floated it up to the sideline, and it was actually picked off but overturned, but the penalties negated it. He was thrown to Equanimeous St. Brown there, and St. Brown is just waiting for the ball to come to him. He's not going and attacking the ball in the air. And it's like, dude, you're 6'5", 210 pounds. He's not a thick dude, but you're the tallest guy on the offense. Go get the ball. Like, you got to want it more than the other team. And it's just these little things about Equanimeous St. Brown. It's just like, man, he's not very good. And Dante Pettis offensively is just a guy. And so it's very concerning that Velus Jones can't be beating them out at this point. But it makes sense why Claypool is able to instantly get a bigger role and why he could make such a big difference in this Bears offense once things get rolling a little bit more for that group as well. There was another route for Claypool, before I forget, where Fields and him were just, a couple of times the two were just not on the same page. There was a slant route where Claypool kind of slows down right as Fields throws the ball, and Fields thought he was going to keep going, and Claypool kind of stopped his route a little bit early, and they incomplete pass that way. And there was another wide receiver screen where Fields just sailed it way over Claypool's head, and I think he was expecting Claypool to be further out, and just trying to get those two guys on the same page is going to take a little bit of time as well. But you can see where, as that builds, that could become a very exciting connection for this Chicago Bears offense. And we're seeing glimpses of it, of those kind of plays building up. And of course, the trick play as well. There's always a few more trick plays than you even realize were run in games because they weren't always executed to the trick that maybe they were supposed to. So keep an eye out for more of that coming down the line from your Chicago Bears. Certainly we'll be keeping an eye out for it, and we'll break it down for you each and every week right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Here on the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team every day, and that's every team in professional sports nowadays. If you're looking for your second listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It is the biggest stories of every day in sports, plus the instant reactions, the big game recaps, all of the most important takes. Think of it as like when you're watching SportsCenter as a kid growing up and you're catching up on everything from the night before. This is that, but podcast form, on demand, also on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, on the Odyssey app, you name it. Locked On Sports Today has you caught up every single morning, 25 minutes or less. So check that out with your second listen. Coming back for Locked On Bears for your first listen again every day this week, and from here on out for your next opportunity to bear down.